She did not plan it. That was the truth she would return to, years later, when the candles burned low and the house was quiet and the man beside her slept with his hand still warm against hers. She had not planned any of it, not the desperate grip of her fingers around a stranger's sleeve in the middle of a crowded London ballroom, not the lie she had whispered against his ear. And certainly not the look on his face when he turned to her, steady, unreadable, and entirely too composed for a man who had just been claimed by a woman he had never seen before in his life. She had only wanted to disappear. Lord Ashford Vane had a way of moving through a room that made every exit feel smaller. She had seen him across the hall and felt the familiar cold weight of his gaze like a hand closing around her throat. He had left her, publicly, cruelly, without the dignity of a private conversation, and now he was here, in Lady Pemberton's ballroom, wearing a smile that suggested he had already decided how this reunion would go. So she had turned. She had grabbed the nearest arm. She had said, very quietly, "Please. I need you to pretend you know me." And the stranger had looked down at her with gray eyes the color of winter stone, and said nothing at all for 3 full seconds. She had no way of knowing, in that moment, that she had just changed the entire course of her life. Her name was Miss Eliza Hartwell, and she was 24 years old, moderately pretty in the way that does not stop rooms but keeps them comfortable, and possessed of exactly £42 to her name following the death of her father 3 months prior. She was not, by London's measure, a woman with many options. She knew this. She had been accounting for it quietly since the morning the solicitor arrived at the Hartwell townhouse with papers and a regretful expression. Lord Ashford Vane had known it too. He had known it when he first began courting her 6 months earlier, lavishing her with letters and morning calls and a proposal that had arrived in a blue velvet box she still could not bring herself to open. He had known it when she had said yes, gratefully, perhaps too gratefully, the way a woman says yes when she has run the calculations and found no other sum that works. And he had known it, she suspected, when he had ended the engagement by way of a note delivered to her breakfast table, informing her that his circumstances had changed and he hoped she would understand. She had not understood. She had sat with that note for a very long time, reading it until the words blurred, and then she had folded it precisely in half and placed it in the kitchen fire and watched it burn. There was no scandal. Lord Ashford had been careful about that, at least. Careful enough that the broken engagement was discussed in drawing rooms as a mutual parting, a gentle dissolution, something both parties had agreed upon with quiet civility. She had not corrected the story. She had too little left to spend on anger. Lady Pemberton's ball was the first event she had attended since the mourning period for her father had concluded, and she had come because her cousin Margaret had insisted. And because refusing would have required explaining, and explaining would have required feeling, and she was not ready for that yet. She had not expected Ashford to be there. She had not expected him to walk toward her with that particular smile, the one that said he had already rewritten the story in his own favor and expected her to confirm it. She had turned. Her hand had found a sleeve, dark wool, expensive, solid as a doorframe. She had spoken her desperate, quiet plea. And the stranger had turned. He was tall. Not absurdly so, but enough that she had to lift her chin. His face was angular, controlled, the kind of face that had learned long ago to give very little away. He wore no particular expression. His eyes moved from her face to the point over her shoulder where, she knew without looking, Ashford was now watching, and then they came back to her. "Your name," he said, very quietly. "Eliza Hartwell." He did not smile. He offered his arm, the arm she had already grabbed, which made the gesture slightly absurd, and he turned them both smoothly toward the refreshment table, positioning himself between her and Ashford's line of sight as naturally as if they had planned it for weeks. "Elliot Ashbourne," he said, reaching for 2 glasses of champagne and handing her one. "And I do not, in fact, know you. But you have 20 minutes before I am required elsewhere, Miss Hartwell. I suggest we make them convincing." She took the glass. Her hands were steadier than she expected. "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me yet," he said, and looked away across the room with the mild, disinterested expression of a man who was performing boredom with considerable skill. She did not learn his full name until later that evening. She did not learn his title until 3 days after that. And by then, the arrangement had already begun. His card arrived the following afternoon, delivered by a footman whose livery was of a quality that made Mrs. Hartwell, Eliza's elderly aunt, who had moved in following her brother's death, clutch her shawl and make a small sound of reverence. The card read, Mr. Elliot Ashbourne. Calls at his convenience. Beneath that, in a different hand, likely added at the last moment, I owe you nothing, Miss Hartwell, and yet I find myself curious. If you are willing to explain what occurred last evening, I shall call at 3 o'clock. If not, discard this and we shall consider the matter closed. She read it twice. Then she wrote back. 3 o'clock suits me well. I will explain what I am able. I ask only that you bring no assumptions. He arrived precisely at 3. She had laid out tea, not because she wished to impress him but because it gave her hands something to do, and she had learned in the last 3 months that idle hands were dangerous things. He sat across from her in the small, somewhat battered sitting room that still bore her father's books along every wall. And he looked at nothing in particular with the same expression of careful neutrality he had worn the night before, and she told him the truth. Not all of it, not the breakfast table, not the fire, not the £42, but enough. She told him about Ashford. About the proposal. About the note. About the way he had walked toward her last night as if the only story that existed was the one he had written. Elliot Ashbourne listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a brief silence. And you chose me, he said, because I was nearest. Because your arm looked solid, she said, before she could stop herself. Something moved through his eyes, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. It was gone before she could identify it properly. I see, he said. He picked up his teacup. He set it down without drinking. I should tell you, Miss Hartwell, that there is a complication. She waited. I am not, strictly speaking, simply Mr. Ashbourne. He said this the way one might mention a minor inconvenience. I hold a dukedom. Ashbourne. The title is recent enough that I find it somewhat inconvenient in social settings, which is why I occasionally omit it. The silence that followed was not brief. You are a duke, she said. I am. She set down her own teacup with more care than the moment perhaps required. And the complication, she said, is that we were seen last evening. By at least 4 people whose interest in gossip exceeds their interest in accuracy, he confirmed. By this morning, we are apparently engaged. The room was very quiet. Outside, a cart passed in the street. I see, she said at last, because it was what he had said, and because nothing else came. I am not asking you to be distressed, he said. I am asking you to decide what you want to do about it. She looked at him across the tea tray, this stranger, this duke. This solid-armed inconvenient complication who had turned his body between her and the worst moment of her recent life, and she thought about £42. And a house that was not hers past the end of the season, and Ashford's smile, and the way the note had burned. What do you want to do about it, she asked. He considered this with the same unhurried gravity he seemed to apply to everything. I need a duchess, he said. Not urgently. But my estates require management and my solicitors require heirs and my mother requires evidence that I am not going to die alone at Ashbourne Hall surrounded by ledgers. You need, if I am reading the situation correctly, a great deal more than £42. She went very still. How did you are wearing a gown that was fashionable 2 seasons ago, repaired at the left sleeve. Your boots are excellent quality but the heel is worn down in a way that suggests they have not been replaced because you could not replace them, not because you preferred them that way. And you served very good tea in a very modest room, which means your pride is intact but your circumstances are not. She thought about being offended. She decided it would be wasteful. The marriage, she said carefully. What would it mean? A home, he said. Security. My name. And my absence, for the most part. I am not a man who requires much of a wife beyond competence and discretion. I have houses to manage. I travel frequently. I would not impose. It was not, she thought, a romantic offer. It was, however, an honest one. Yes, she said. I will marry you. He nodded, as if she had confirmed the time. He finished his tea. He left at 3:30. They were married 6 weeks later in a small church in Wiltshire, in the presence of his solicitor, her aunt, and a vicar who seemed privately astounded by the proceedings. The Duke of Ashbourne said his vows in the same quiet, controlled voice he used for everything, and Eliza said hers clearly. And they were pronounced husband and wife on a Tuesday morning with a light rain falling outside. That evening, he placed a ring on her hand, a family piece, old gold set with a single dark sapphire, and told her that the carriage would leave for Ashbourne Hall at first light. He was not in the carriage when it left. A note informed her he had been called to London on a matter of estate business and would follow within a fortnight. Ashbourne Hall was 4 hours north, up roads that worsened the closer they came to it. Through a landscape that was beautiful in the way that things become beautiful when they are completely indifferent to human opinion. The house itself appeared at the end of a long, neglected drive, half obscured by overgrown yew hedges, its stone facade grey and water-stained and utterly silent. The housekeeper who met her at the door was a small, tight-faced woman named Mrs. Crace, who informed the new Duchess of Ashbourne, without particular warmth, that the house had been running with a reduced staff for 3 years, that several rooms were closed, that the heating was unreliable in the east wing, and that she hoped her grace would not require a great deal. Eliza looked at the woman for a long moment. "I require a cup of tea," she said, "and the household ledgers. And perhaps, when you have time, Mrs. Crace, you might show me the kitchen gardens." The housekeeper blinked. Something shifted, very slightly, in her expression. "The ledgers," she repeated. "All of them," Eliza said pleasantly. "From the last 3 years, if you have them." It was not what the woman had expected. It was, Eliza suspected, not what anyone had expected. Over the following days, she learned the shape of the neglect. It was not catastrophic. The Duke was not a careless man, the neglect was the neglect of absence. Of a house that had been maintained at the minimal level by servants who had stopped being asked to do more because no one was there to ask. Rooms were dusty but structurally sound. The kitchen garden was overgrown but the soil was good. The roof had a leak in the northern corridor that had been reported 3 times in the ledger and addressed 0 times. She addressed the roof first. She found the carpenter in the nearest village, a quiet man named Fletcher who looked alarmed at being summoned to the hall but whose work was careful and clean. She paid him from the household account. She had found the household account, which still had money in it, buried under 3 years of unread correspondence, and she wrote the expenditure in the ledger in her clearest hand. Then she turned her attention to the kitchen garden, and to the 3 children she discovered living in the old gamekeeper's cottage at the far edge of the property. They were the children of the gamekeeper, who had died the previous winter. Their mother had died 2 years before that. The oldest, a girl of 11 named Jane, had been keeping them fed through a combination of the kitchen garden, small wages from Mrs. Crace, and a determination that struck Eliza with the force of recognition. She sat with Jane in the cottage kitchen, which smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs, and listened to the child explain, with great dignity, that she did not require charity. Only to be left as they were. "I am not offering charity," Eliza said. "I am offering a proposition. I need help in the kitchen garden. I am told you know it better than anyone. I will pay you a fair wage, and your brothers will attend to lessons in the house on mornings when the weather is poor." Jane studied her with dark, evaluating eyes. "The last Duchess," she said, "did not come." "I know," Eliza said. "I am not the last Duchess." There was a pause. Then Jane said, "The east beds haven't been turned in 2 years." "I suspected as much," Eliza said. "We had better start there, then." It became, in its way, the center of things. The garden, the children, the slow, methodical labor of bringing a neglected house back into something that breathed. Mrs. Crace thawed, not dramatically but steadily, in the way that practical women thaw when they see other practical women working without complaint. The 2 footmen remaining on staff, young men named Thomas and Carey, began appearing in the rooms that needed attention without being asked. The kitchen maid, a round-faced girl named Polly, started baking with the herbs from the recovering garden, and the house began, gradually, to smell like somewhere people lived. Eliza wrote to her aunt. She wrote to the solicitor. She did not write to the Duke. He returned, without announcement, on a cold afternoon in November, 4 months after the wedding. She was in the kitchen garden when she heard the carriage. She had mud on her gloves and a cutting of late rosemary in her hand, and her hair had, at some point during the morning, come loose from its arrangement, and she had pinned it back with what she suspected was a twig. She walked around the side of the house. He was standing at the front steps, looking up at the facade, the clean facade, the cleared drive, the yew hedges cut back, with an expression she could not immediately read. He turned when he heard her footsteps. She saw his eyes move over her, the mud, the apron she had borrowed from Polly and forgotten to remove, the twig, the rosemary, and something happened behind his face that he controlled before it became legible. "Your Grace," she said. "Your Grace," he replied, which was not, she thought, what he had expected to say. There was a pause. "You have done something to the hedges," he said. "They were strangling the drainage," she said. "Come inside. I'll have tea made." She walked past him up the steps, and after a moment, she heard him follow. He moved through his own house like a man navigating a room that had been rearranged in the night, recognizing the bones of it but unsettled by the differences. The clean windows. The smell of bread and beeswax. The fire in the east sitting room, which he had not expected to be lit. The drawing in chalk on the slate board in the corridor. Jane's brothers had discovered it as a canvas, which someone had framed with a narrow strip of wood and hung as if it were a genuine work of art. He said nothing about any of it. He ate dinner with the formality of a man who was reminding himself of his own manners, and Eliza sat across from him and matched his formality precisely. Not from coldness but from something more careful, the knowledge that she had built something here, that it was fragile in ways that had nothing to do with architecture. And that she was not going to let him dismantle it with a careless word before he had earned the right to have an opinion. Over the following days, the distance held. They were polite. They were competent. They occupied the same house with the careful efficiency of two people who had agreed, without saying so, that their arrangement did not require warmth. But the house was small in the ways that mattered. She saw him in the library at odd hours, reading, or not reading, sitting in the chair by the window with a book open that he did not appear to be looking at. She saw him stop in the corridor outside the kitchen when Polly's bread was new from the oven, as if the smell had caught him off guard. She saw him watch the children from the window, Jane explaining something to her brothers with the pragmatic authority of someone who had been the oldest for too long. On the fourth evening, she heard him speaking to Jane in the corridor, and she stopped walking without meaning to. "You were the gamekeeper's daughter," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, Your Grace." He was a good man. "I should have," a pause. "You should have been provided for." "We are provided for now," Jane said, simply, and moved on. He was silent in the corridor for a long time after that. Eliza continued walking, not slowly enough to be eavesdropping, not quickly enough to pretend she had not heard. At dinner that evening, he asked, for the first time, about the ledgers. She brought them. She had reorganized them, annotated them, flagged 3 accounting errors that predated her arrival by 2 years, and created a separate record for the estate improvements with costs and projected returns. She laid them open on the table and walked him through them without apology or performance, the way she would have walked anyone through them, because they were her work and she stood by it. He read through them without speaking. He turned pages. He went back and reread 2 sections. "The roof repair," he said finally. "The northern corridor. Fletcher did good work. It was in the report 3 times before I arrived." He said nothing to that. He did not apologize. She had not expected him to. "And the children," he said. "Jane works in the garden. Her brothers attend lessons when the weather keeps them in. I pay Jane from the household account at the same rate we paid the under-gardener before the position was made redundant. And if I objected?" She looked at him across the table. "Do you?" she said. The silence stretched. "No," he said. She closed the ledger. The storm came in the second week of December, sudden and violent, the kind of weather that descends on the northern counties with the malice of something personal. The wind took slates from the roof, the repaired section held. But the southern wing did not, and by evening the rain was coming through in 3 places and the temperature in the upper rooms had dropped to something dangerous. They worked through it together without discussing it, Eliza directing Thomas and Carrie with buckets and towels and the remaining blankets from the locked linen closet she had opened months ago over Mrs. Crace's protests, and the Duke appearing silently beside her in the worst corridor with a lamp and a calm that she recognized, by now, as his version of competence under pressure. Somewhere in the middle of the night, with the storm still loud against the windows, they ended up in the kitchen, the warmest room. The safest room, sitting across from each other with cups of something Polly had left simmering and the sound of rain overhead. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "My brother died at Waterloo." She did not speak. She waited. "I was not there," he said. "I had been removed from active duty 6 months prior. Family pressure, my father was dying and there was the title to consider. I was told to come home." He looked at the cup in his hands. James was not told to come home. He was 23. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it without embellishment. "I have spent," he said, carefully, "considerable time since then being somewhere other than here. Other than anywhere that required me to feel like someone who had been spared when he should not have been." She thought about what that meant, the travel, the absence. The empty house with the unreported leaking roof and the gamekeeper's orphaned children and the household accounts no one had read in 3 years. Not carelessness. Not cruelty. Absence as a form of self-punishment, or perhaps of self-protection. She could not be certain which, and perhaps he could not either. "You cannot repair a roof," she said at last, "by staying away from it." He looked at her. "No," he said. "I cannot." The storm wailed against the glass. The kitchen was warm with the last of the evening's bread heat, and the lamp between them made their shadows move on the wall, and something shifted in the room that was not the weather. She did not reach for his hand. She was not ready for that, and she suspected he was not either. But she refilled his cup, and he did not look away, and they sat together until the worst of the storm had passed. Lord Ashford Vane arrived at Ashbourne Hall on a Tuesday in January, which Eliza considered, later, to be a very Ashford sort of thing to do, to appear without warning on a cold morning after the Christmas season, wearing the expression of a man conducting a charitable visit. He had, he explained, heard of her marriage. He had thought it only right to call. He was accompanied by a solicitor of his own and a letter that he placed on the table in the drawing-room with the care of someone who expected it to cause significant disruption. The letter, he explained, was a claim. Her father had owed him money, a debt contracted privately and informally, but recorded, he insisted, in documents his solicitor had carefully preserved. The sum was substantial. The implication, not quite stated but present in every measured syllable, was that Eliza had married under false pretenses, concealing a debt that was now, by the laws of marriage, her husband's. She was in the room when he said all of this. She did not look at him while he spoke. She looked at the table. Then she said, "May I see the documents?" He passed them across. She read them carefully, page by page, with the same methodical attention she had brought to 3 years of household ledgers. "This signature," she said, when she had finished, "is not my father's." A brief silence. "I beg your pardon, my father had an injury to his right hand from a hunting accident when I was 12. He wrote with a particular leftward slope for the rest of his life. This signature does not have that slope." She placed the documents back on the table. "I have 16 letters from my father written in the last 5 years of his life. I keep them. If your solicitor would like to compare the signatures, he is welcome to do so." Ashford's face had changed. The charitable visit expression had gone. "Eliza," he said, dropping the formality with an intimacy he had not earned, I think, said the Duke of Ashbourne from the doorway, "that this conversation is over." Neither Eliza nor Ashford had heard him enter. He stood in the doorway with the particular stillness of a man who had decided something. "Lord Ashford," he said, "I am the Duke of Ashbourne, and this is my house. You have presented fraudulent documents to my wife in an attempt to extract money that is not owed. You will leave now, and your solicitor will hear from mine before the week is out." Ashford stood. His face had gone carefully neutral. "I intended no, yes," the Duke said, "you did." Ashford left. His solicitor followed. The sound of their carriage retreating down the newly cleared drive was, Eliza thought, one of the more satisfying sounds she had heard in a long time. She was still standing at the table, the documents in her hand, when Elliot crossed the room and stopped beside her. "The letters," he said. "You have kept all of them?" "Yes," she said. "Are you all right?" She looked at him, at the steady gray eyes, the controlled face, the man who had said yes. You did, in a voice that had left no room for argument on her behalf. I am, she said. Thank you. Do not thank me, he said, and then, very quietly, do not thank me for something that was simply right. She looked down at the forged signature. She looked back up at him. He left me, she said, by way of a note. At breakfast. A long silence. I know, he said. I made inquiries, after the ball. I needed to understand what I had agreed to. And what did you decide? That you deserved better than you had been given, he said. By him. Anne, he stopped. He looked at the window. By me as well. It was not, precisely, an apology. It was, she thought, the beginning of one. Spring came to Ashbourne in stages, the way it always does in the north, tentatively, with setbacks, but with an underlying determination that could not be argued with. The kitchen garden came fully alive under Jane's management and Eliza's direction. The south roof was repaired. The east wing was reopened, the rooms aired and cleaned and furnished with pieces from storage that turned out to be beautiful once the Holland covers were removed. The Duke did not leave. This surprised them both, she thought. He found small reasons to stay, correspondence that required his attention in the estate library, a matter of tenancy agreements in the village. A consultation with Fletcher about the drainage on the north field. The reasons were real, but they were also, she understood now, chosen. He was choosing the estate. He was choosing to be present. They fell into a rhythm that was not what she had expected from a marriage of convenience. He brought ledgers to the table and she brought hers, and they worked side by side in a companionable quiet that held, beneath it, all the things not yet said. He walked with her in the evenings, down the lane behind the house where the hedgerows were coming green. He listened when she spoke. He told her things, carefully, slowly, about James, about the war, about the father who had pulled him home and died before Elliot could decide whether to forgive him for it. She told him things too. About her father's books, about the breakfast table, about the way she had watched the note burn and felt that she had made a mistake in not feeling more than she did. I think, she said, on one of those evening walks, that I was so accustomed to being practical about everything that I had begun to do it with emotions too. To tally them up and decide they were too expensive. He was quiet beside her for a moment. I know something about that, he said. In April, a letter arrived from London. It was from his mother, a formidable woman whom Eliza had not yet met. Whose existence she was aware of primarily through references in the estate correspondence, and it contained an invitation to come to town for the season. The letter was addressed to them both. He brought it to her in the garden, where she was assisting Jane with the early planting. And read it to her standing in the morning light with mud on his boots from the field and a faint expression that she recognized now as something he rarely allowed, uncertainty. You do not want to go, she said. I want to know what you want, he said. She considered. London meant Ashford, possibly. It meant drawing rooms and assessments and people looking at their marriage and deciding what kind of thing it was. It also meant, she thought, a chance to stand beside him in public and be seen as what they were becoming, rather than what they had been. We should go, she said. It is time. He read the letter again, briefly. My mother will have opinions, he said. I have survived opinions before, she said, and went back to the planting. Something happened on his face then, something that had been building, she thought, since the storm in December, since the kitchen table. Since the fraudulent documents and the forged signature and the yes, you did at Ashford's retreating back. It did not announce itself. It was quiet and certain, the way things become certain when they have been decided without ceremony. That evening, he found her in the library. She was reading one of her father's books, which she had brought north in a box and arranged on the shelf beside his own. He sat in the chair across from her and looked at her for a long moment, and she let herself be looked at. I owe you an accounting, he said. She set the book in her lap. I married you, he said, because it was practical. Because I needed a duchess and you needed a name, and I told myself that was sufficient. I told myself I was doing you a service. He looked at his hands. I left the morning after the wedding because I did not know how to stay, and I have spent a long time not knowing how to stay in places that matter. That was not a service. It was a failure. She said nothing. She waited. You took a house I had abandoned, he said, and you made it into a home. You repaired the roof I ignored. You kept the children I should have looked after. You managed the accounts, and the garden, and Mrs. Crace, which I will tell you is a greater achievement than most of what I accomplished in the war. He paused. And you did all of it without complaint, and without asking me for anything, and I have been, he stopped. I have been watching you for months, Eliza, and I have been trying to find the language for what I have understood. And have you found it? She asked. Yes, he said. He looked up at her. I came home to a house that had always been a duty. But I come home to it now because you are here. You became, he let the silence hold for a moment, and then he said it simply, you became the reason. She looked at him across the library, this man, this Duke. This stranger who had been solid as a doorframe when she needed a doorframe and who had built, out of obligation and grief and gradually something else entirely, a presence she had begun. Without quite permitting herself to rely on. She thought about the ballroom. She thought about her desperate hand on his sleeve, her whispered pleas, the 3 seconds of his silence before he turned and gave her his arm. She thought about what she had asked for, escape, and what she had been given instead. You were not what I planned for, she said. Nor were you, he said. I am still angry, she said, about the note. The carriage note. Yes. The morning after the wedding note, she said. Yes, he said quietly. I know. I am sorry for it. I am genuinely sorry. She considered this for a long moment. The fire settled. Outside, the April wind moved through the newly greened hedges, and somewhere in the house, she could hear the distant voices of Jane's brothers, who had stayed for supper again and showed no particular sign of leaving. I grabbed a stranger in a ballroom, she said at last, because I needed to get away from a man who had decided I wasn't worth keeping. Yes, he said. And instead, she said, I kept you. He stood, slowly, and crossed the room and sat beside her, not across from her, beside her. On the settee with her father's books along the wall and the fire warm and the house alive around them in a way it had not been in years. Would you, he said, and stopped. Yes, she said. I haven't asked anything yet. I know, she said. But the answer is yes. He took her hand with the careful deliberateness of a man who understood the weight of what he was holding. Outside, the evening settled over Ashbourne Hall in long gold light, over the repaired roof and the breathing garden and the cleared drive, over the house that had been a duty and had been made, by the woman who had never planned any of it, into a home. They sat together in the library until the candles burned low and the fire settled to embers, and there was nothing left, in any room of that house, that felt abandoned. And that, dear listeners, is the story of a woman who grabbed a stranger to escape her past, and found, in the stranger she chose, something she had never dared to plan for. A home. A partnership. A love built not from a first glance but from muddy gardens and stormlit kitchens and the slow, quiet courage of 2 people learning to stay. If this story moved you, we would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell us which moment stayed with you most. If you know someone who loves a slow burn historical romance, share this with them today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. There are many more stories like this one waiting for you, and we never want you to miss a single one.